So hi everyone for joining us in a series of talks that are part of the project of human rights in the 21st century. My name is Nataša Briški. I am a journalist from Slovenia and editor-in-chief of independent media network Metas List. And my co-host is
Aljaž Penko-Bitenc, also a journalist, doing podcasting, blogging, and other stuff that make my life more interesting.
So human rights, a cornerstone of European integration and one of the world's most important values. Its democratic heritage and its conscience. Protection of human rights symbolizes a beacon of hope, a call for action, setting a high standard by which we judge the width of our generosity, the depth of our compassion, and the breadth of our humanity. And Aljaž, we already had conversations about human rights.
Correct, Natasha. In the previous installment of this series of interviews, we talked to Andreas Potakis, the Greek ombudsman, and we ended that conversation with the ongoing and ever more pressing question of migrations. And as complex as that question is, it's also a nice segue into our today's talk and our today's guest.
Yes, and we have a very special guest with us is a former president of Slovenia, Mr. Danilo Türk. We are very happy that you are joining us.
Pleasure. My pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. So the main topic of the conversation in regards to human rights is going to be access to water, to drinking water, and with that related so many issues. So, Mr. President, before we dive deeper into the team that you are leading, the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace, just curious and a personal question, why is a question of access to water important for you?
I think this is a globally important question, and I think it affects everybody. Water is life. Everybody needs water for survival, and many people don't have water available for survival. So I think that relates to everybody. Of course, in Slovenia, which is a water-rich country, we are not necessarily aware of the drama of water. And we believe that water is somehow a given, it's available, it's practically cost-free, and therefore we don't think about it too much. But it is not like this, and a large part of the world suffers from water scarcity. There are many places in the world where water disasters make life increasingly difficult. And obviously, water is something that the world has to deal with, everybody has to deal with. Now, we live at a time when the global warming is becoming a huge problem for the whole world, and global warming will affect water availability. In particular, it will make water scarcity even more dramatic and will produce additional water disasters. We have to understand that water is the main medium through which all the climate changes happen. They happen either as, droughts or as floods, basically. So we have to be really aware of the importance of water. And when I was asked, interestingly, by my Swiss colleagues and friends to chair the panel on water and peace some time ago, that was in 2015, I gladly accepted that role and I chaired it. We produced a report in 2017 and continue to be part of this increasing global discussion about water. So that's my background. But I think that everybody has, a special, different background. I mean, there are people who have to work hard for water, and there are people who have to think about water in different ways. Like in Slovenia, we recently had a referendum where a huge mobilization of civil society occurred as a result of concern that new construction law will make the availability of water, access to water flows more difficult for the people. So you see, water comes into our existence in many ways every day and for everybody.
But in that respect, Mr. President, is it at all possible to find a common denominator in the say, the position or influence of water on peace, on exercising one's human rights. As you said, it comes into our lives, it touches our lives in so many different ways. Were you able, with your high-level panel on water and peace, to come to certain conclusions and recommendations?
Clearly, well, as panel, we obviously were able to reach a number of conclusions and recommendations. But that, of course, is not nearly enough. I mean, the world is still very far from a serious understanding of the problem and the need to manage a common action. Now, I would like to mention, just to explain a little bit, first on water and international cooperation. I mean, every major peace treaty in Europe ended with some kind of water arrangement. Every peace treaty since the Peace of Westphalia, 1648, you know, the Vienna Congress and the Napoleonic Wars, again, the Rhine was very much there. Danube was a matter of several peace treaties. So the link between water and peace has become very clear also in these most visible ways. I mean, as a matter of regulation in peace treaties. And obviously, there are many examples where water cooperation has become an important part of daily work of states. We have many, you know, water cooperation systems around the world, around waters, I mean, rivers that flow over several territories of states. And we have some interesting modern examples. About 10 days ago, I was involved in a meeting in Geneva where 4 states agreed on joint exploration and use of their common or neighboring aquifer, that means groundwater, water which is beneath surface. And those countries were Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau. That were the 3 main countries who came together. And this will expand. Now, what I'm saying is this, water is a matter of international cooperation, but it is not sufficiently developed. There are around 85 arrangements like the one that I mentioned. They are mainly about the surface water, not so much about groundwater. But there are about 300 situations around the world where transboundary water cooperation would be necessary. So that's the situation as far as the international cooperation is concerned. Then we have to know that in human rights, if you look at the evolution of human rights discourse, you know, over 3-4 decades, which is what I can do because, you know, I'm sufficiently old for that, and I have been involved in many of those discussions in the past. We see that recently there has been a certain shifting of focus towards economic, social, and cultural rights. There are more and more, there's more and more concern about those rights. And the right to water and the right to healthy human environment are very much part of that tendency. So, and you know, when something is described as a human right, that usually means that it is becoming a priority concern. So we see that tendency as well, but none of this has given rise as yet to a sufficiently sturdy, sufficiently robust international system. That is still to be done.
As you mentioned, the Global High-Level Panel on Water and Peace that you chair had a task of developing a set of proposals aimed at strengthening the global framework to prevent and resolve water-related conflicts, among others. If I understood you correctly, you are of an opinion that the awareness of global challenges today is not nearly in a level that it should be. Who, in your opinion, didn't do a good job or good enough?
Well, I think that relates pretty much to everybody. I think that there were actually one could approach this question from the other side more easily and say, yes, there were some extraordinary places where water cooperation has been understood sufficiently early and developed to a sufficiently high level. I mentioned Senegal before, you know, the Senegal River which affects Senegal, Guinea, Mali, and Mauritania, has become a place of very intense and very helpful water cooperation system, and very recent, historically speaking. Now, in Europe, we needed decades and centuries for developing transboundary water cooperation properly. There were some examples, more recent examples, where things went more quickly, including in our part of the world. The Sava River Agreement is an agreement that has been achieved soon after the wars in the Balkans were ended, and several successor states of former Yugoslavia emerged, and they got together and developed a framework for transboundary water cooperation. So we see that examples like this exist, but they are still a minority. There is not enough work done, globally speaking, and also in the most advanced countries like the United States. They have huge problems with water infrastructure within the country. We have heard about some of the disasters that happened in the past period. And clearly, the United States will need very serious investment in improvement of water infrastructure in its own territory, which is a water-rich territory. So again, I would say in general, all of us are insufficient, with a few examples where a higher degree of cooperation or action was possible, and they are still the minority.
Mr. President, either out of abundance of water resources or out of this heightened awareness of the need to come to an agreement, you said there are good practices to be taken into account, maybe to emulate it. But on the whole, it would seem that the humanity now is faced with two equal but opposite problems. On one hand, we have areas of conflict where scarcity of water resources is one of the drivers of these conflicts. And on the other hand, we have an overabundance of water, or in this case, I probably should say salt water or rainwater, the climate change, obviously, which is also driving migrations, driving changes in local economies, and is upending basically the world as we know it. So are we perhaps too late in dealing with these issues?
Well, I don't like the idea of being too late because, we are late, clearly. But the question is, what is too late? I don't think that one can define with any clarity, the point at which everything will be too late. I think efforts must continue. Let me mention this. There are recent examples of improvement, but there is no global action for water, and that's a pity. That's really a problem. Now, paradoxically, if you look at the United Nations system, every unit of the system, all funds, programs, and agencies have something on water. Water is a very present theme in the work of all United Nations agencies. There are 32 units in the UN system which are dealing with water. They are coordinated in a mechanism called UN Water, but it is a very weak mechanism and doesn't produce a coherent global action. There was one global conference on water which was really impressive, and that was as far back as 1977. When the UN convened a global conference on water in Mar del Plata in Argentina. And it was very interesting that at that time, the world, after having gone through very serious analytical work, produced the principle of integrated water management, which is very helpful to the designing of national policies on water. But it was not able to do much about the international cooperation in water issues. We have now currently a UN Water Action Decade, which is a process which was established in 2018, and there should be a water conference in 2023. We'll see what kind of outcome will that conference produce. It will have to be much more oriented towards international cooperation. But again, it's not going to be easy because political complications, political obstacles are always a problem for the United Nations. Today, in particular, the level of political trust and political readiness for cooperation is very low. So we should not have too high hopes, but we should have some hope. So 2023 will be the year of that conference. And of course, the period between now and 2023 will be important for international action. The European Union is preparing something that they call the Council Conclusions on Water Diplomacy. So we'll see what that brings, possibly under Slovenian presidency or under the French presidency. We'll see when it happens. So that's being prepared. And there is awareness, there will be some action, but I can't say if that is going to be sufficient.
Well, the United Nations in a historical development has for the first time recognized that everyone everywhere has a human right to live in a safe, clean, healthy and sustainable environment. The text was proposed by Costa Rica, the Maldives, Morocco and Slovenia. Now, you have been part of United Nations for many years, and you also have been on a very top level positions. It's also been said that states must include this right in the constitutions and legislation. So my question would be of two parts. How much of a power does the United Nations still have on what the states actually do? And how much of a difficult task do you think would be adding that to actual constitutions and legislation?
Well, let me answer by referring to a thinker of early 20th century, Max Weber. Now, Max Weber defined the ethics as being of two kinds, ethics of aspiration and ethics of duty. Now, ethics of aspiration is very easy to achieve. We all aspire towards good things, such as clean and safe natural environment. And I think that much of this UN normative work is motivated by the ethics of aspiration. But then, on the other hand, there is an ethic of duty, which comes from an ethical source translatable into law that is actually applied. And here, of course, the situation is much more difficult. The UN is not producing much law today anyway. You shouldn't think that this is the summit of legislative activity of the UN. UN was much more active in the past, and that has produced some results, has changed constitutions, has influenced the ways in which human rights are being treated within states. And one should not underestimate the achievements which were there and which are very real. But one should also not expect miracles now. And here you see, when it comes to implementation, one can quote another thought from a very different sort, from a very different source, from a Russian talk in the 19th century. We say that the severity of Russian law is very seriously modified by total absence of implementation. See, that of course is this kind of sense of absurdity which is typical for the Russian humor. But one has to understand the grain of salt in all this. Implementation is a big task, and it doesn't help if you have a nice pronouncement if implementation falters. And right now, I think the world is facing very serious questions of implementation of human rights, including the right to safe drinking water. So I'm not very optimistic at this point. I would, however, support further normative development, clearly, but it would help if that was matched by practical experience and practical examples which show the way forward, both within states and through international cooperation.
But you seem to have arrived at the crux of the issue, how to get there. I mean, we mentioned that water being the driver, one of the drivers of conflicts, the one that comes to mind to my Cold War-induced mind or 80s-induced mind is the Golan Heights in the Middle East, where, as far as I remember, water was a big part of that part of Middle East conflict. But if in the region of Sahel, people are now migrating en masse due to a lack of water resources. This, of course, then further complicates the migration issue and generates conflict in Northern Africa, etc., etc. How do we go about it? I mean, is it a top-down approach from the international community? Should it be a bottom-up approach by the people, if you will? Not to sound too revolutionary, but clearly something needs to be done.
Yeah, surely. Well, I think one has, first of all, to understand the reasons for the crisis. I mean, of course, the part of that is ecological, is environmental, is global warming, is the shrinking of the Lake Chad, for example, was a very big problem for many years, and insufficient cooperation of Lake Chad region has been a large part of the problem. And then that problem was exacerbated by the destruction of Libya. And of course, the flow of arms from Libya into the Sahel and mushrooming of a variety of terrorist and other armed groups, which of course creates a big security problem today and adds to the whole problem of Sahel. Now, what is to be done? I think the UN, for example, has realized that the activities that have been in place for the last 10 years or so are not going to be successful. In other words, reliance on peacekeeping operations in places like Mali, for example, is not going to solve the problem. And if you talk to people from the region, they will say, when foreign military forces come, either national, like French, or international, like United Nations, they first take care of themselves. And they dig wells and they produce whatever they need to have water for their own needs. And they really don't care about the local population. In addition, they do not necessarily understand the social structure and actual functioning of the local population. It's very easy to see problems as a result of terrorism or ethnic tensions. It's more difficult to understand the entire history, the economic, social, cultural aspects of conflicts and solutions. Now, interestingly, this year in 2021, the UN is trying to change the approach. So they have established a kind of a consolidated framework for the Sahel and West Africa. And they try to bring together all these different actors, including World Bank, African Union, European Union, and everybody else, to see whether this comprehensive approach produces better results. However, what is still lacking is a proper inclusion of the local actors. Now, you said bottom up or top down. What we now see is still top down, but it won't produce the result in itself. What is needed is a kind of a combination of the two. When we met in Geneva for the Sahel, for example, 2 weeks ago, we talked about this. And obviously, it's very important to get local actors, including local water chiefs, who are not necessarily the same as political chiefs or military decision-making people, whoever they may be. They may be different, but are very important in managing water. And of course, that is fundamental for the whole existence, well-being, and potential for economic development for the region. Incidentally, last year in September, there were big floods in the Sahel, and the EU Commissioner for Emergencies, Janez Lenarčič, traveled to the place and pleaded for such a comprehensive action. Well, now we have the beginnings. We'll see what will happen and whether really the international actors will be able to include, to fully involve, to engage people from the region.
Mentioning European Commissioner Lenarčič, I would like to ask you a question on the EU. So what do you think the EU can or should do in regards to access to safe, healthy drinking water?
Now, European Union is a big actor in development assistance, and it could do more. It could include water aspects more centrally. Now, I'm not suggesting that EU is oblivious of water aspects in their own development-related projects, but more needs to be done and more can be done. Just one example, I was in Sri Lanka, when was it, almost 2 years ago now, we are not traveling during COVID time. And Sri Lanka has water abundance in the southern part and water scarcity in the northern part of the island. And that water scarce part of the island is also conflict sensitive. That's the area of Tamil ethnic group, and the war which has ended a few years ago can erupt again. I mean, so one has to be really very careful about what needs to be done. I've been to the Tamil areas in Jaffna and in other parts of the country, and I have seen that the neighboring India has developed a project of supporting local water management, which includes local irrigation, very small scale, but systematically done in a larger region, and water accumulation for housing. Now, there is scarcity of surface water and groundwater in northern Sri Lanka, but it is possible to better use the rainfall, and that is what India is doing, I think, quite successfully. And I'm asking myself, could European Union do more of this kind? I mean, there are technologies which are really very simple, sand barriers or such things, which were tried in several parts of Africa, and they could be supported more seriously than is the case so far. So, in short, yes, EU could do more through development assistance in particular. I'm not so sure about diplomacy in the conflictual areas. I mean, where with an active armed conflict. There, I don't see much hope for European Union, Robert.
But speaking of European Union, could it be, and I will be happy if you refute me on this point, but that there needs to be, that the EU needs to work on itself more as well. What I'm trying to say is that plenty of times there seems to be a lack of European Union, and suddenly nation states within the European Union crop up again and manage or stop managing their waters on the borders. I'm reminded of a case, I believe it was 2012, when heavy rainfall struck the eastern part of Austria, swelling the rivers, and the Austrian river management raised the bars, hence flooding the further areas downstream, which happened to be in Slovenia, and the Slovenian government was not notified in time. You were present at that time, and I remember you been visiting the region. Could it be that Europe needs more of Europe in terms of water resource management?
Well, I think that Europe has the necessary directives and has done a lot. Of course, there are certain bilateral situations or regional situations which cannot be managed from Brussels. I mean, they have to be managed locally. And now, I'm glad that you mentioned that example, because it's really a very interesting example. When I was president, I asked, I mean, when the floods were starting, I immediately called our foreign minister and said, well, what's going on? Are the protocols for management of the Drava River adequately applied? Because we should be notified, the coordination on the water flow should start, and so forth. And the minister told me, Minister Erjavec was foreign minister at that time, and he said, yes, President, we are in touch with our Austrian colleagues, and we are receiving guarantees that all the protocols are respected. Now, subsequently, the debate moved on, and what became central in that debate is is something that relates to the to climate change, because you see climate, well, the usual way in which storms are developing in the this part of the alpine terrain creates flows that go from east to west, from west to east. So, you know, from North Italy to Slovenia, that's the usual flow of storms and, you know, rainfall and all other phenomena. But in this case, the storm went from west to east, and all of a sudden it turned north. And Austria had an enormous amount of water, of rainfall, which was completely unprecedented. And then in this very short period of time, the protocols that existed could not function because they realized, well, you know, the water level is rising so fast, we have to do something. So they opened the floodgates and we got much of that water. Now, you see, this is an argument which, of course, will have to be verified. And I know that there are court cases going on right now because very heavy damage was inflicted upon Slovenian farmers in particular, but also other people. And therefore, court cases have been started, and we'll see what that brings. The important lesson from there is that we have to expect unprecedented events in the time of climate change, and therefore, you know, the cooperation on water is even more important than ever before.
Excellent sentence to maybe end our conversation for now. Many questions left, and I am sure, Aljaž, that we'll have many conversations in the upcoming weeks and months and years on the topics that we just discussed with Mr. President Danilo Türk. Mr. President, thank you very much for being part of the debate.
Well, thank you. I was very pleased with the discussion, and let's have a further discussion whenever you find something interesting to discuss.